We all want to help out in our communities, right? We see something that's not working and we want to fix it. But what if all that energy, all those good intentions, were actually aimed at the wrong target? That's what we're digging into today, the vital skill of discernment. It's about learning to see what a community truly needs, not just what's obvious on the surface.
And that question, well, it gets right to the heart of everything. We're often so eager to jump into action, to do something, that we completely skip over the most critical first step, just seeing the situation clearly. And believe me, this isn't some small detail. Getting this right is literally the difference between helping and, believe it or not, sometimes even hurting.
So, here's our game plan for today. First, we'll look at what happens when good intentions just completely miss the mark. Then, we're going to learn how to see below the surface of a problem. After that, we'll talk about how to truly listen. And finally, I'll give you some clear signs that tell you you're absolutely on the right track.
All right, let's dive in, but I've got to start with a kind of a hard truth. Why do so many community projects, big and small, with tons of passionate people involved, why do they so often just fail? Well, the reason is usually way simpler than you'd think.
It really just boils down to this one simple, powerful thing. These efforts don't fail because of a lack of passion or money or effort. Nope. They fail because of a fundamental misunderstanding. They solve the wrong problem. And you gotta understand, the fallout from this, it's huge. When we misunderstand the real need, the solutions we come up with just don't match reality. All that time, money, and energy gets wasted. But here's the worst part. Trust gets broken. The community starts to feel less like people being served and more like a project being managed, and that is a terrible feeling.
So, the big question is, how do we avoid falling into that trap? Well, it all starts with learning to see things differently. We have to learn to tell the difference between what's just visible and what's truly vital.
Okay, so first, let's get on the same page with a couple of key words. Let's talk about a problem. A problem is the thing that grabs your attention. It's the graffiti on the park bench, right? The frustratingly long line at the DMV. It's the loud, obvious thing that we notice first.
But a need is a totally different beast. A need is the deep, underlying thing that you have to address if you want to make any real lasting progress. It's not just what we notice, it's what actually has to be fixed.
And seeing this difference, it's a total game changer. What looks like just a bunch of visible frustration on the surface could actually be a symptom of a much deeper need for trust and coordination between people. What seems like some urgent five-alarm crisis might really be pointing to a relational or structural issue that's been ignored for years.
This leads us to probably the biggest mistake people make. Think about an iceberg, right? We see that little tip sticking out of the water. That's the symptom. But we forget about the enormous hidden mass of ice underneath. That's the root cause. So many failed efforts are just people frantically trying to chip away at the tip of the iceberg, totally ignoring the giant foundation beneath.
Symptoms? They're the loud stuff. They're emotional. They're screaming for your attention because they're right there in your face, and they feel super urgent. But the root causes? Man, they're often quiet. They're structural. They're about how people relate to each other, and they're long-term. Real discernment is about having the discipline to resist the pull of the loud stuff so you can finally find the quiet stuff.
Okay, so how in the world do we actually find these quiet, hidden root causes? Well, the answer is surprisingly simple, even if it isn't always easy. We have to learn how to truly listen. We have to move from just assuming we know to actually understanding.
Question number 1, and this is maybe the most important one you can ask. Who are the people living with this issue day in and day out? Their perspective isn't just another opinion on the list. It's the most essential one. You have to start there, period.
And once you know who to listen to, the next part is just as crucial. You have to actually honor what they say. What do they say the challenge is? Not what you think it is from way over here, but how do they describe it from inside their own experience?
Asking this question is a huge sign of respect. People aren't just sitting around waiting for a savior. They're smart, they're capable, and they've already been trying to solve their own problems. Finding out what they've already attempted honors their work and, just as important, it stops you from making the same mistakes they already did.
All right, but listening to others is only half the battle. There's another voice you absolutely have to check, and that's your own. Because let's be honest, one of the biggest things that clouds our vision is our own ego. Real faithful service starts right where our personal agenda ends.
You've got to ask yourself, and be brutally honest here. Am I really drawn to this because it's hurting other people, or is it just because it bugs me? Am I trying to fix a community's problem, or am I just projecting my own pet peeves onto them? This kind of self-check is absolutely crucial if we want to make sure we're helping for the right reasons.
Okay, so you've done the work. You've observed, you've listened, you've checked yourself. How do you know you're actually on the right track? How can you be confident you've found a real need? Well, thankfully, there are some pretty clear signs.
Here's the beautiful thing. Real needs tend to bring people together. A genuine need won't just be something you see. Lots of different people in the community will confirm it. The people most affected by it, they'll hear you describe it and say, yes, that's it, that's real. The folks already working on the issue will welcome your help instead of fighting you. And any solution will make sense for that specific place and will respect the leaders who are already there.
And that really brings us to the core takeaway here. Look, we're all in such a rush to have the answers, right? To have the 5-point plan. But the most effective, the most faithful, and honestly the most respectful action you can take always begins one step before that. It begins with the hard, patient work of just understanding.
So, as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with one final question to really chew on. Think about your own community, an issue you really care about. What did you assume was true before you ever really stopped to just watch and listen? Seriously, think about it. The answer to that question, that's where the real work begins.